basic techniques, data densification, and our data set. This is the exciting lesson for me. We've built up to this point. So we are going to develop our Tableau workbook based on the data set that we created. We'll be leveraging the techniques that we've seen so far, applying our knowledge of data densification, and drawing to get our desired result. So for me, this is the lesson that should hopefully switch on that light bulb, have that amazing moment for you. So let's open up Tableau. So let us start off with opening our Excel file. Let's click on Microsoft Excel. Let's locate the data source that we've developed. Again, this is our first version. Let's take in items first. You can see Tableau creates a logical table, but we don't want that. Let's go into the physical. Let's take data densification and drop it on the side. Here, I want us to create a join calculation and just enter in 1. I want us to do the same for the other side. Go to create join calculation and type 1. Now let's explore and see what we've actually achieved here. As you can see, we've duplicated all of our data. So this could be tricky when it comes to numeric values, but since we just have position and points, it should be fine to duplicate. But the key is that for our starting item, we now have 2 records, a path going from 0 to 100. So now we can actually apply our data densification techniques here, which is pretty cool. So how are we going to do that? Let's click on sheet 1 to go to our workspace. We will start off by right clicking on path, going to create bins, and let's make this 1. So typical of data densification, we create our bin object. Now I want us to create our index calculation. Let's type index and index -1. Again, for me, I like starting at 0. God knows why. So we need a few extra things. I also want to know how long our shapes are. So let's create a TC size, a table calculation. We're going to write Windows max, and we're going to put here end x minus Windows max start x. So this will give us how long our items are. Now the key question I commonly get asked is, why do we have to use Windows max? The key here is that, remember, when you're using bins, only the values will show up unless you wrap it around with a table calculation like index. So imagine if you have 100 buckets, end x would and start x would only appear in some of the buckets, but by doing a Windows max, they are available for all the points, all the buckets, and therefore we can use it throughout our data visualizations. So let's click OK. Now we're going to have some fun. I'm going to create a calculation for rows, and this is simply going to be the following. We just want Windows. Again, we have to use Windows max, and I want us to put start y. Nice and simple. We're just creating a starting point for the rows, and I want to wrap this around with a float, just so we have some decimal points as opposed to whole numbers. That looks really easy. Let's put rows onto rows. Not overly exciting yet, but let's put ID into the detail. Almost getting there. And let's turn this into circles for now. Now there looks like there's something happening here. We now have items on the rows, but we need columns as well. We need some form of are moving towards the right, as we say. So let's create a new calculated field. Let's call this columns. And from here, we're going to go for a good old Windows Max, and we're going to have start X. That makes sense. Let's apply that. Let's see what happens when you put columns here. That is pretty interesting. We have various items. Interesting. So we have some items so far, nothing to write home about yet. But what I want to do now is right click on columns. Actually, no, firstly I want to take our paths. I want to bring it into rows. Right click and make sure that show missing values is selected. Very key item. Always make sure that show missing values is enabled. I'm going to drop that into details. So now we have this path bin that goes from 0 to 100. Right click on columns, compute using path bin. Let's do the same with the rows and see if we have anything interesting. Nothing yet. However, this is where the magic really happens. What we're going to do now is edit columns. So right now we're just saying start X. So whatever it is, just have a single point. However, what happens if we add index? Ooh, let's see what happens here. It might get a bit funky. Let's right click on columns and path. As you can see, we now have loads of points, 0 to 100. The problem is each of the points index is just 1 to 100. So you're adding this. It's not quite what we want. So what we're going to say is, because there's 100 steps, instead of just adding index, let's divide index by 100 and multiply it by the size. Think about that. So we calculated the size for each item, and now we're going to try to apply this. As you can see, TC size doesn't have a configuration, so it says null. But now let's go to compute using path. Here we go. We now have our items. That is pretty nifty. So what I want to do is let's just increase the size. Entire view. Now, because I'm guessing this is starts, so what I wanted to do is to double click and let's just reverse the axis. That looks pretty nifty. Now, just to finish things off, I want us to create one more table calculation just to hammer it home. Now, I want us to call this TC label. So TC for table calculation, and I want us to say if index is equal to 50, then I want us to Windows max and name end. Nice and simple. What does that do? Let's click apply. Okay, and now let's drop this onto label. Let's right click, compute using path bin, click on the labels and allow to overlap. Aha. Let's click center align. Now here we have it. As you can see from our template, we are now drawing the individual points or the individual items. Now let's just quickly review. Obviously from our data source we have our start and our end points, both from the x-axis and the y-axis. So x going along, y from top to bottom. We calculated how far apart each of these should be, and we've just drawn them out. So we calculate how far they should be by using TC size to figure out what is the size of it, dividing it by 100 to basically give us how big each of the 100 steps should be, and then just to plot it out. So here we have it. We have our basic template. We've connected to our Excel, and that now drives this interesting drawing. And this is the basics of how we are building our template. In the next section, we are going to refine this by adding links, by adding colors, attributes, to add related items, and really to build this out. So I hope you've learned something in this lesson. Please feel free to review. Otherwise, let's close off this section and move on to the next one.